All right, let's go ahead and get our VTS discussion done this week. Make sure you have your student VTS discussion page printed out and fill out the top part of it, your name and all that stuff. And we will go ahead and continue with our observational part about the visual details. Okay, so here is the piece that we're going to be looking at today. We're going to break this down so I can let you have a little bit of a closer look at each of these images. But here is the entire art piece, all the little images all together. So some of the first things that we can notice is there's a lot of people. All right, there's a lot of people on this. And you notice there's a lot of also reds and blues. Reds and blues are very prominent in this artwork. We have a alternating. I don't know if you noticed that, but we have a blue here, a blue here, and a blue here. So that really gives this a sense of movement because your eyes want to follow that blue as you go through here. So now let's talk about some of the people. What do we notice the people actually doing? We notice this guy. There's a crown on this guy, right? There's a crown on this guy. There's a crown on this guy. So this has to be images of some kings, correct? We also have a small boy here, noticeably different. Look at the head size for one. And looks like the same boy, right, over here. But we don't see that same boy anymore, right? He's not in any of these images. This boy has a head in his hand, right, of this other person, which looks like this guy right here, right? And you notice, look how big he is. Like he's like not even in the frames of the pictures here. He's way up here. And we can also notice that, look, there's one picture, another picture. We have another picture. We have another picture. We have another picture, another picture. So we got like sets of two in these pictures. This one we have this older gentleman here is doing something with this person, right? Looks like he might be pouring something. He's got his hand on him. He's imparting something. And we also have a little halo around his head here, which is interesting because you should know as far as like Catholicism and a lot of early Christianity and different things like that, when people painted religious images, often they put these little halo looking things around the holy people. And so obviously there's something significant about this man because you don't see that around any of the other people here. And we also see this king looks pretty cool. He's got a sword. He's got his hand out. Maybe he's like not knowing what to do or something. We have this king. He's got a spear here, and here's this guy here. He's like, what? He's got his hands up. And then we have this king, and he's clearly upset and crying. So let's look at a few of these a little bit closer. Now we have an idea of which ones are where. So here's the top section. And oh, look, this guy, we can see he has a spear coming at this younger person. But there's something coming out of this person's hand here, and he's got a little pouch. So there's some kind of fighting going on. We have a army over here, but they're all behind the king. This one person is out in front of him. And then over here, here's the guy, same person. You think it's the same person, but look, he's got different colored thing here. So I don't know if that's significant. His little tights are the same color. But this is clearly the same large individual because here's the shield. It looks the same as that checkered look. And these people, they all look like they're a little bit frightened at this guy. So obviously he killed this individual. So let's move on. Here's the middle section. Here's that other king that's got the spear, and oh look, he's got a harp here. So maybe he was playing and king didn't really like it. I don't know. And here's the guy, the holy man. Okay, he has that thing around his head there. And then we have all these other people here, and they're looking here at what's happening. And this guy has his hand on his chest, so maybe he's like, oh, this is a great thing. And I don't know, this guy has his hand out, so we don't really know what that means. Let's move on to the next part. The last section, a little bit blurry here, but we can still see some things going on. There is a spear going through this guy, despite the fact that, I don't know, he looks a little confused here. The horses both look quite sad, but I don't know, he's not even on his saddle. So we can notice that. I don't know why he's not on his saddle, and I can't tell. I don't know, this guy looks like he might be a little concerned. His hand's up by his face here. And then we see over here, he looks like he's a little bit in distress, pointing at what's happening. This guy's pointing toward this king, and he looks a little bit sad too, and he's looking at this scene. And the king's looking away, covering his face. So maybe this scene here has something to do with what's going on here. So don't know. So anyway, you have plenty of visual details with this that we kind of went through here. Now you can also mention the decorative outside here. It looks like it's like framed, and it has this repetitive little decorative half semicircle here. And each of these looks like they're in a nice little square. They're built on a square here. Each of these images has a square behind them. That's mostly a solid color. So let's move on. All right, so the name of this piece, let's fill that in. This is called the Morgan Leaf. And the Morgan Leaf, it's an illustrated page from the Winchester Bible. So this is a Bible page. So if you haven't figured it out by now, you probably know who these pictures may be about, especially the young boy. So let's see. It's one of the most magnificent illuminated manuscripts to have been made in England in the 12th century. Illuminated manuscripts are manuscripts in which the text is supplemented, I mean, you add this to it, with decoration, such as initials, borders, miniature illustrations. Many of the pages were decorated with thin leaf, gold, or silver. This caused the pages to shine and look luminous. So yes, they actually use gold. Here's an example. And they would come in and first add in all this gold wherever they wanted it. All right. Which, you know, gold was, it would make it more costly. And then they would come in and do all the decorating and stuff. So here's a little image up here. So it is the frontispiece for 1 Samuel with scenes from, if any of you guessed it, the life of David. Oh, and in case you didn't get the date, here's the date right here, early 12th century. A frontispiece is simply an ornamented page at the start of a book. Front piece. Front is piece. Okay. It is painted with tempera and gold. The temper comes from the word temper, which means to bring to a desired consistency. If you temper something, you make the consistency the way that you want it so that you can paint with it and use it for whatever artistic means you need. Pigments were ground in a water mixable medium and then made usable by tempering them with a binding adhesive, which was usually egg yolk, because the powder and the water really weren't good for much without a binding adhesive. Now, a lot of times the binding adhesive is included in the temper paint. So that's why you don't have to go home and add egg yolk or something to it. But if you were homemaking all this stuff, which there are people that still practice this artwork like this, and they do all their homemade tempera and add stuff to it to make it usable. This was different from fresco painting, as frescoes required no binder, and if you ever studied that, or if you've looked at that in class this year, the frescoes actually, you add that to, it's like a mud thing, and when it dries, the pigments and everything actually soak into and bind with the fresco, the mud part that's on there, that plaster, and it turns hard like a rock, and it's almost like the painting and everything is a rock, so it's very hard. It was painted on parchment made from calf skins. Yes, calf skins, baby cows. Now here's the crazy part. It's suggested that this Bible that we're talking about, is composed of over 250 calves. Now, you think about, let's move past the saddening part of this, that the little cows died, you know, but that's a lot of cows, that's a lot of calves. And those calves are what's going to turn into cows to make more cows. So you go and you kill these calves, that decreases your herd by quite a bit. So it's going to be an expensive thing to do. This alone, it made it a very expensive book to produce. And then counting the cost of having the scribes produce the writing, got to hire scribes, and then the illuminators to produce the art, it would have been even costlier, as it would have taken them over 4 years to make. That is a long time. It's a long investment in doing some artwork, among other things, of course. So sources say that illustrating the Winchester Bible seemed to have been a complicated process, because that's the name of the Bible that this Morgan leaf page was in. And we'll talk about why that little page is called the Morgan leaf. We'll talk about that later. But it's in the Winchester Bible. So it seemed to have been a complicated process that ended up becoming more than the illustrators could handle. Originally, the only illustrations that were planned were decorated initials, which went before each book of the Bible that was related to the text. That's what they originally planned to do. Though, as an afterthought, and as they kind of started looking at this, full-page frontispieces to 3 books of the Bible were added. One of these is the Morgan leaf, our focal point for this week. So, the illustrations were drawn and painted by at least 6 different artists. Yes, lots of different artists worked on the same one. Imagine sharing your piece of artwork with 6 other people in your class, and each of them contribute to it. I probably wouldn't want to do that, but that's how things worked back then. Many of the illustrations were left incomplete, being half painted or only underdrawn. The 6 artists have never been identified, but names have been given to them in order to distinguish their different styles. So, as usual, a lot of these ancient artists and stuff, the artists that, way before we did a lot of signing everything and keeping up with who did what, sometimes you had to just separate artwork and the people that made it based on their styles. You had to really observe these things. So the 2 responsible for the Morgan leaf are known as the masters of the Apocrypha drawings, or the masters of the Morgan leaf. So this says unidentified artist, but if you'd like to be a little more a little more specific, you can put the masters of the Apocrypha drawings, or you can put master of the Morgan leaf. Sounds like an adventure novel or something. Okay, so the scenes on the Morgan leaf are set against colored paneled backgrounds, and we kind of talked about that. And these help to project the scenes forward. Talk about backgrounds and stuff. Okay, the artist uses a characteristic narrative device of the period, which is to arrange scenes in pairs. And we noticed that at the beginning, with the first representing the scene before and the second the scene after. The scene on top left represents the figure of David, who is shown slinging the stone at the giant Goliath. All right, so that was David and Goliath. While on the right, he cuts off his head. So David is also shown clothed, but without armor, which conforms to the biblical account. Now later, during the Renaissance, everything changed a lot, people's ideas. it became more common to actually show him unclothed. So thankfully, though, this Bible was created prior to that, and they drew him with clothes on. So that's good. Looking closer at the artwork, we see in the middle section David represented on the left. Ta-da, there's David. So that was David. I guess he got a little older. His hair's a little longer, and he's a little more manly looking. He was playing the harp in front of King Saul. He then, in a fit of jealous, should have put rage right there, my bad. In a fit of jealousy, let's say that, he throws a spear at David. In the paired image, remember they come in pairs, we see David being anointed as Saul's successor by Samuel after Saul kills himself. So here, he is anointing, and that is Samuel, and he was a prophet, so that's why he has a little halo-y thing around him. Looks like a plate. Let's see. Now, in the bottom section, we see Absalom, David's son, and he is being put to death. Look at that. That's such a sad little scene here. In the final accompanying scene, David is informed of the death of his son and weeps in grief. So they're all informing him. They're like, "Hey, David, your son, he died. He got killed." And he's like, "Oh, that's horrible." And they're all looking at David, wanting to console him. And he's extremely sad, covering his face. So I still do not know why he's not in a saddle, though. We may never know why. So, the creation of such an expensive Bible had to be paid for by someone who had a substantial amount of wealth, right? I mean, we talked about how expensive this thing was. So, it's generally assumed that the patron of it, that's the guy that hired everybody, was Henry of Blois, the Bishop of Winchester, and one of the most powerful men in England. Yet, there's no real evidence about this, and there is an alternate suggestion of its patronage. It's suggested that King Henry II, if you've studied him in history, may have played a role in supporting the production of this great manuscript, and some of the imagery in the Morgan leaf may actually support this, because the people who believe that King Henry II had a part in the Bible, they suggest that these images of David were parallels, that they parallel the life of Henry and his son revolted against him in the process. He ended up losing his wife, which caused Henry a great deal of grief. So, like I said, not all of these images are done, and these 3 books were picked to have the artwork done. And so there's a reason these 3 were picked to have the actual pictures, and this may be why. So, it is important to note that the Winchester Bible is a very significant Bible. It contained the entire text of the canonized Bible and was also a large format manuscript. So prior to the 11th century, Bibles that contained the entire text of the Bible were very, very rare. But Pope Gregory, he began the Gregorian Reform movement that stated that the possessing of these giant, large text, complete Bibles were essential to monastic communities, so that they all needed one. So the Winchester Bible was created due to this movement and these new ideas at the end of the Romanesque period, which was a period dedicated to religious preservation. So since it was stated that the monastic communities needed these, that's why this one was actually made. So you can note that on your book, that that's why this was completed. I mean, I know a guy obviously there was a patron for this to pay for it, but that's kind of the purpose of it. It wasn't for like a personal guy that was like, "Hey, I'm a king and I just really want this Bible," and all this other stuff. He had it made, and he paid for this, whoever it was, because it's speculation. So anyway, the Winchester Bible was made at the Cathedral of St. Swithun's at Winchester, England. And it is still at Winchester, where it is normally on display. Now, the Morgan leaf and several other decorated elements have been removed from it, and they're displayed elsewhere because they're just so cool. The Morgan leaf is currently on display at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, which is why they decided to call it the Morgan leaf, because it's at the Morgan Library and Museum. So that's where the name came from. Okay, so go ahead and prepare your art A&E like you normally would do. in class, cut out your art history timeline image, the little bitty one, put that on your map, and cut out the bigger one, put it on your Art A&E, start that, draw your little sections and all that stuff, and have that all ready so you can just step right in and do your other stuff on Friday. So I hope you enjoyed it, learned some stuff about the Morgan Leaf and the Winchester Bible and how expensive it was back then to do these sorts of things. And 4 years, it's a long time. All right, y'all have a great rest of your week.